Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Today is October 18, 2011, and we are just wrapping up Learning Module 3. And Learning Module 3 is about children and language. We did the first part of children and language last Tuesday evening, and we're going to wrap things up today. We did the bulk of the work last Tuesday, so we may finish up a little earlier than last week. Nevertheless, there's still some things to talk about here, and I may repeat a couple of things, but that never hurts to revisit things. And this PowerPoint does have some overlap in it from time to time. In any event, some of the things that kids have trouble with are abstractions. I mentioned that last week, and it's okay to revisit it now. These very vague, inchoate, kind of murky, cloudy, non-concrete things like truth, right? Like area, place, things that aren't concrete and can't be immediately associated with something in the child's world. Kids have trouble with abstract concepts. Other things that kids have trouble with are referred to as relational expressions of time, speed, size, and duration. I called them comparatives earlier. And Professor Walker, we're going to take a look at her chapters in a moment. I think she may call them indexicals, or maybe even comparatives. But again, they are these kinds of words that have little or no meaning unless we connect them up with something or unless we compare them to something. Old and young are very relative. These are relative words. Maybe that's another way to describe it, right? Whether something's big or not, or fast, or whether something happened a long time ago or not. These kinds of words and these kinds of figures of speech really have no meaning unless you relate it to something else, unless you connect it up to something else. And we've all heard children say that, they had a PlayStation 2 a real long time ago, and that could have been last year or 2 months ago. So especially for kids, concepts of time and duration, chronology are very difficult, and to them, a long time ago is last year, and to us it's probably 10 years, 20 years, it depends. Even to adults, one needs to look at context to discern the meanings of statements like a while ago or a long time ago. In fact, they're not even good prose. When you're writing, especially writing formally or documenting, whether you're a police officer or a child protective service worker, one needs to be concrete and direct. The same way that I'm encouraging you to talk to kids is the way one ought to write. Simple, concrete, direct. We received a referral from School 18 a while ago, or a few years back, or a few years ago. What does that mean? A few years ago, a while ago, a few years back. I don't know what that means. When people write that, I got to figure out what that means. You need to figure out what that means. So one needs to be direct and concrete, and one needs to be direct and concrete with kids, So, and they have a hard time with these things, as they should. Kinship terms, those are just another form of pronoun. Kinship terms. They're indexicals, they're placeholders. They stand in place in a sentence for some other proper noun, for some relative's name. That's what kinship terms are. They're general descriptive words of a relative or a family relationship. Grandma, uncle, cousin, stepfather. Right? But they don't mean anything unless we have the rest of the words that surround them, unless we have context. And thus, they are inherently ambiguous. They're capable of multiple interpretations because we have many cousins. You have a few grandmas, maybe more. I talked about it last week, right? Brothers, sisters. These kinship terms are almost as confounding as pronouns. They are placeholders. They are not concrete. They are by definition ambiguous, and ambiguity is the enemy of a good forensic interview. Ambiguity creates confusion. Confusion undermines the reliability of the outcome. Confusion undermines the reliability of the information that we get. So we want to avoid these things. We want to avoid kinship terms, which are solely the same as they're just like pronouns. Number is difficult. We're going to take a look at Professor Walker and number, or how many. I expressed to you last week, once or more than once is good enough. We had a dialogue about that kind of line of questioning in forensic investigations. Hierarchies, stronger, bigger, those are like the relational expressions I talked about a moment ago. So kids are going to have trouble with those things. What does that mean? Well, we ought to minimize our use of these kinds of words, right? We ought to avoid them. We ought to be more concrete, more direct. For every grandma and cousin and brother, you have a Jessica and an Anthony and a Michael, right? And there's a lot less confusion when you say Jessica, Anthony, or Michael than when you say, well, your cousin was there. Where was grandma? And what about your brother? Now, if we rewind the video or we go back and look at the written narrative about what happened, we may be able to figure out that the brother he meant was actually Michael. We may be able to do the math or the diagram, right? We may be able to do all that. But why should we have to? Why should we have to take the risk that maybe we weren't referring to that? Maybe he was referring to a different brother and not Michael. If we simply said Michael, we wouldn't have this ambiguity. John and Frankie came into the room. He had a big serrated knife in his right hand. Who had a big serrated knife in his right hand? John and Frankie came into the room. He had a big serrated knife in his right hand. Now, English language geeks would tell you that the knife belongs to Frankie because he's second in time. Thus, the pronoun refers back to the proper noun that's later in time. Really? Okay. Do I know that? I don't think so. Does the kid know that? Does the interviewer know that? Is that what the interviewer meant? I don't know about that rule. That rule has some appeal because Frankie came second in time, thus he had a serrated knife in his right hand. The he is closer to him in the sentence. But that doesn't end it for me. I don't know about you. John and Frankie came into the room. Frankie had a big serrated knife in his right hand. Pronouns, dangerous. Kinship terms, dangerous. I mentioned this as we exited last week. Adolescents may have the language skills of school-age children if they're undereducated, underparented, unattached, or developmentally delayed. You know what kind of kids do the best in school? What kind of little kids grow up to do well and have a rich and extensive command of language and the ability to express themselves well? There's two important things that happen when kids are growing up preschool, right into the first and second grade, that will predict nearly all the time, a child, assuming that their aptitude is general and they don't have any delays, that will predict nearly every time how well spoken they are, how well their command of the English language is. One of these things is something every parent ought to do with their child at night, a few times a week at a minimum. Every night would be ideal. Read to them, right? If you read to them, they develop an appreciation for language and a fondness for it. And they use the language. I mean, they mimic us. We're our examples to them. And this is more than an example. Reading to children is engaging. It's very powerful. It's very potent. In fact, literacy was declared a public health issue by the American Academy of Pediatrics, and one of the ways to remedy, to use a clinical word, this public health dilemma of illiteracy was to have books available in pediatricians' office to give to caregivers so that they could read to their kids. Books were like penicillin or bacitracin. They were medicinal, according to the American Academy of Pediatrics, because the public health problem was illiteracy. The other thing was what someone said a moment ago, not only read to them, somebody said this in the front here, talk to them. And you will see parents, even with infants, push through Stop and Shop or ShopRite or King's or wherever, the grocery store. And the parent will be going, oh, do we need peanut butter, Gabriella? I think Daddy said he ate all the peanut butter. Where's the peanut butter, Gabriella? Oh, here it is on the shelf. I'm going to put it in the cart. Let's go buy the cereal now, Gabriella. Now the child is nonverbal. She's an infant. But that is a child who obviously will grow up in a language-rich household. And when you grow up in a language-rich household, you will be a good speaker, and you will be a good student, and you will be a success, in most cases. If you are denied that environment, if it is not language-rich, if no one reads to you, you'll struggle more. Doesn't mean you can't be good, doesn't mean things may not work out well. And that's why you have some of these adolescents that are undereducated. And that reading and talking is parenting, man. That's parenting. If you're underparented, you're going to struggle. You're undereducated, you don't go to school, there are problems, there are disruptive forces in your life. You may not get the education that your peers have, and you may have difficulty communicating with forensic interviewers and with anybody who needs to communicate with you. Obviously, unattached kids and the developmentally disabled will have problems as well in forensic interviews. The other day, my son said to me, in a way I was proud of him, in another way I was a little scared too, and he said, we're doing this fantasy football thing where you put in football players every Sunday morning and they compete against other players and they write down the scores based upon how many yards and touchdowns and sacks and things happen. And he said something like, no, after an interception, the dynamics are very different, Joe. You have to run and get away from an offensive lineman. I said, dynamics? It's true. The dynamics are different. An offensive lineman is not really trained to tackle. And so, and a little bit of me was proud, too. I was like, all right, man.
How old is he?
10.
Wow.
I mean, that don't make him a savant or a genius, but dynamics, that's a heavy word for a 10-year-old. We are reminded that when children give us information, or any witness for that matter, but especially children, we need to follow up and we need to get additional information whenever they introduce a new concept. Now, this isn't so much a linguistic issue, but it's a good rule of thumb for investigative interviewing or forensic interviewing. And then we went outside the back of the bodega, and me and Tanisha went down by the Passaic Falls, and then we went and got in the car. Tell me who Tanisha is. Not, is Tanisha your friend? Is Tanisha the girl next door that you told me about earlier? No, those are suggestive questions. Tell me who Tanisha is a great question. And if you're worrying about cognitive egocentricity, what would you say? How would you ask that question if your concern is cognitive egocentricity? Let's see if I taught you well earlier in the semester. You can say, tell me who Tanisha is, but you might put a sentence before it or after it.
I don't know Tanisha.
Thank you. I see many of you remember. Good. I know you want to get it. Yes, I don't know Tanisha. Tell me who she is. I wasn't there by the Patterson or the Passaic Falls. And I don't know who Tanisha is. What happened next? Tell me who Tanisha is. Where was the tent? What did the stick look like? Very, very good questions. What is the back room? We had one of these 3 weeks ago. The little girl went in the grocery store in Patterson and the bodega, as they're referred to, and the man went to get some food and invited her with him in the back room. I've never been to that store. Tell me what the back room is. What does it look like? Where were the muffins? Who reached for them? How did you get the muffins? You have to question these children as a blank slate and be mindful of the words that we use when asking those questions. Because you will be very tempted to say something like, well, tell me what the back room looks like. Are there a bunch of shelves, or are there things that are in the front piled up back there, or something like that? Now, that would be a multiple choice question. It would be an open multiple choice question, as you'll learn later, because I said, or something like that, but it would not be a good multiple choice question. Because I am injecting facts into that question based upon my experience with back rooms in bodegas or grocery stores or businesses. You weren't there. You certainly weren't at this bodega. Tell me what it looks like. Tell me what it looks like in the back room. What's the first thing you see? What's the first thing you saw, Gabriella, when you went into the back room? Tell me what else you saw. Tell me where these things were. Tell me where he was. Tell me this, tell me that, right?
So, but that question was problematic, the one up there.
Which one?
What's in the back, or what is the back room, what's in it? It's two questions in one.
Right.
And it is a pronoun.
That's right. Now, I think the person who did the slide, and these slides are from Corner House and Finding Words and from the project, I think they would defend that by saying they're two sentences, they're not a compound sentence. You want to avoid compound sentences. So if this child said, he asked me to go in the back room, what is the back room? That might be a little clunky because it sounds like it asks for a definition of back room, some kind of forensic or clinical or precise definition rather. Tell me about the back room probably would be better. Tell me what the back room looked like would probably be better. I don't think it is terrible. I don't think we're going to win or lose a case based upon this, but we strive to be the best we can. We strive to use the optimum method of questioning kids, and what's in it? Well, you're right. It has not only a pronoun at the end, but what else at the beginning? What was the thing that kind of gives some kids problems? What's, right? A contraction. What is in it? I don't think this one is too problematic because it's not a negative. It's those negative contractions that are most difficult for kids. But again, it has a contraction in it in the beginning, and it uses the pronoun it. Now, also remember I said, listen, we can't abandon pronouns completely, right? When it is obvious and when the sentence sequence is such that the pronoun clearly and obviously refers back to the proper noun in the preceding sentence, you can get away with it. I would rather have you say, tell me about the back room, blah, blah, blah. What is in the back room? I prefer that. I prefer that you train yourself to use proper nouns and descriptive words and concrete words all the time, even at the risk of being a little clunky. When John took you in the back room, what was John wearing on John's body? That can get a little clunky, right? You could probably get away with when John took you in the back room, what was he wearing? Right? Because that he follows the John and all that. However, I'd rather err on the side of too many Johns than too many pronouns. You got it? Good. We talked about this freaky notion, the global memory search and negative polarity. Now, it was near the end of class, so it might have went right through your brain and out the window. And sometimes it can do that even when I try to explain it. But let's take another look at it, because these are, this is forensic interviewing and language and kids advanced. And remember I said, when you use words like any form of any, or even ever, there are two problems that linguists have observed. One is the problem of global memory search. Now, you might want to jot that down. It's not among my slides. But Professor Walker talks about it in her chapters. And I know you all read her chapters.
Absolutely.
Okay. But global memory search simply means when you ask a kid a word, like a question that involves words like any or ever or always or never, that these are words that are virtually limitless. They speak to infinity. And not all kids, with many of the lessons that I suggest here about children and language and everything else, some kids are better than others. Some kids don't think that touches can only happen with a hand. They can discern the nuances of touch. But some kids have problem with touch, A significant amount of kids that it requires that we talk about those things. The same thing, some kids don't have a issue with a global memory search. They're able to answer the question well and directly, and they understand us. But there's a significant number of kids who, when you say, did he ever wear shorts? Ever is a beautiful word that requires a global memory search. Ever means, and I try to avoid computer analogies, but they are often helpful if you understand computers, and most of us know what a hard drive is, right? And they're getting bigger and bigger. That's just a little spinning thing inside. Well, this thing has flash memory. Let's not get. It's a little spinning disk in there where all of your documents are, and spreadsheets, and all of your PowerPoints, and all of your songs and pictures and everything else. They live on a hard drive. And if you buy a computer, it might say 1 terabyte hard drive or 500 gigabytes. Okay? They even have limits. I mean, there's gigantic hard drives that IBM and Apple Computer use, but the hard drive is where information is stored. And if you ever had to do a search on a computer for something that was common, and you said
all different types of things.
Apple
Yeah.
or email, you just put the word email in there. Well, the computer would zzz, it'd take a little while to search and search and search. Now they're getting better and better and better. They'll come up in 10 seconds, even sooner. But nevertheless, it can go on and on. It needs to search everywhere that the word Apple or email is, right? And a computer is finite. If it's 1 terabyte or 100 terabytes or whatever the next thing is, petabyte I think it is. If it's a petabyte or a billion petabytes, Google petabytes, there's a limit. But ever, when you ask a question with the word ever, there's no limit. And so what happens is with some kids, they need to think about all the possibilities, all the evers, Did he ever have on shorts? The bad guy, or Uncle Frank. Did he ever have on shorts? So they got to go. And this doesn't happen consciously, mind you. But their brain kind of goes, ever, I don't know. At least maybe in the summer we went to a picnic. I used to know him. What happens is what the linguists call cognitive overload. There's so many possibilities. There's so many days. There's so much analysis that has to go on to figure out whether Uncle Frankie ever wore short shorts, or shorts with plaid on them, or shorts with a eagle buckle, or whatever the question is about, that they'll simply say, I don't know, or no, or give you a response that's not reliable. On the other hand, If you use the word some instead of the word any, or a word that doesn't pull for a global memory search, you're more likely to get a more reliable answer. Okay?
Did someone or did some? Like,
Well,
'cause
if
know-
you say, did anyone come in your yard when mommy was out? The better question would be, with this global memory search thing, did someone come in your yard when mommy was out? The other thing, and this is just an observation, it really doesn't explain why, it's a characterization. The linguists say that words like any and ever and never, but especially any, have a negative polarity. And I mentioned that word last week as well, or phrase. And it just means that they pull for the answer no. And they may know why, I don't know what they know why. All I know is that when you ask, did you have anything for lunch, some people say no, just a sandwich. Did you run into any professors over by Cohen Lounge? No, just Professors McCormick and Dickinson. Okay, you did run into two professors, you know, if you really want to hit him with the linguistic wet noodle there. What are you talking about? And what the linguists say is, for whatever reasons, and I'm not so sure they even know why, these words have a negative polarity. They kind of pull towards the no rather than the yes. If you look at no and yes as poles, polarity is a form of pole. You know,
And someone is just more neutral.
perhaps, yeah. I don't profess to know all the, but the recommendation by the linguists, and if you look at Professor Walker's book, we're going to look at it in a little bit, is to ask some. Yeah, I guess it's more neutral. Rather than, you certainly don't want it pulling for a yes, because that would be equally bad, right? It ought to be neutral, so that's correct. Go ahead.
Okay, so if, let's say, John touched the little girl's breast or something, right? And you asked the little girl, did anyone ever touch your breast? That would be wrong. Because the thing is, I don't want to use the guy's name because I feel like I will be putting that person's name in the little girl's head, like saying John did touch someone.
Yeah, you're correct, so we wouldn't want to do that. And you used two in that one. Did
Yeah,
anyone
anyone
ever?
ever.
So that's okay, and you give it the double whammy. That might make it even more. That's okay, we can work with that. So I want you to think it out with me. So you want to know whether a different person at any point in time in creation and space touched their boobie as well, right? How can we ask that question without the words any and ever? I'm going to give you a head start. The little girl goes, Big Jerry came in and he grabbed my boobie in the room. And then you want to find out if a different person, some other person. How could you ask that question without any or ever? Think of a sentence.
No, I know, okay, did someone else touch your boobies?
Okay.
Right, but, let's say there's no disclosure and you're just trying to, but you know, let's say the referral says that John did it, but the little girl didn't even disclose to you yet. Like, do I say, did someone touch your boob? I don't know. I feel
Well, that's a
like
good
I'm
question,
putting it-
because now you want to use that ever. And I know, I've seen it, and you want to use that ever. So you want to know whether,
It ever happened.
yeah, in time and space, in the history of her existence. Well, you know, you might say, you see, you just can't come out coldly and without context and ask that question. The first time you asked, it sounded like, just now when you were consulting with me, that there was a disclosure about one boy or person or man, and now you want to find out about others. If there's no disclosure yet, but there's prior information about that, you're in a little bit different position as a forensic interviewer. And we will teach you, you know, how to use the forensic interview protocol, Finding Words Corner House, to get in a place where the question will make more sense. But has someone touched you on your boobie? Would be okay. Now you're saying, well, it doesn't sound right unless you use the word ever, right? Someone ever touched you on your boobie. You know, if that was the only question we were asking her, then you'd probably have to use the word ever. Or you might say, in all the time that you lived in grandma's attic room, did someone touch you on your boobie?
Right.
See, that's a little bit more concrete than ever,
Space, right.
because, things just don't happen where a kid's in there and you gotta ask about her from 0 to today, from birth to now. And when we do interview these kids, there's a very good process that we follow from beginning to middle, to closure, where it'll be easier to say, has someone touched your boobie? And you'll see when we talk about it, we talk about touches, and then we ask them about touches they like and touches they don't like. And has someone, we won't even say someone, do you get touches that you like? Who gives you touches you like? Where on your body do you get? So this finding words protocol has a very specific way to get involved in those kind of questions. So you're really not gonna find a situation where the only question you're gonna ask is a single question of a child without any context. But you can get around the word ever, I guess, if you try hard. Just say, tell me where you live, Gabrielle, at grandma's house. What part of grandma's house do you sleep in? Up in the attic. When you lived has someone touched you on your boobie in your room at grandma's house? Has someone touched you on your boobie in grandma's house? Little clunky, but there'll always be context, I think. Go ahead.
The thing you were talking about before with, did Uncle Bob ever wear shorts, or whatever that question was? If you said to the child, if you had to find out about these shorts, like that's really important to your
Right.
interview, could you ask the child, did Uncle Bob sometimes wear shorts? Or is that a leading question?
Well, you're not talking about ever now, you're talking about whether this is a leading question.
Yes, because you need to know about the shorts, and you need the child to tell you that Uncle Bob wore the shorts on this particular day, let's say. That's an important part of the investigation.
Well, so let's make it important. Let's make a hypothetical. Let's say the little girl was molested by Uncle Bob, and we got information about that. And let's say there was other little girls in the neighborhood that said a man with plaid shorts, kind of looking like Uncle Bob, as the intelligence, was taking them behind the corner store and touching them on their privates. So you want to find out from this witness about Uncle Bob's, not the shorts he had on when he touched her, because we could just say, what was he wearing when he touched you, or what
Right.
clothes did he have on? But you want to find out, did he ever wear plaid shorts, right?
Right.
Is that kind of
Exactly.
hypothetical?
You don't want to say ever.
Okay. Tell me about Uncle Bob's shorts. Tell me about, have you seen Uncle Bob in, again, we need context. If she said, well, tell me what Uncle Bob was wearing when he touched you. Blue jeans with big bell bottoms. Okay. Have you seen Uncle Bob wear other kinds of clothes? Other kinds of pants? What other kinds of pants? Have you seen Uncle Bob wear clothes on his bottom part that weren't pants? What were they? And look, you can ask direct questions periodically, because what you want to avoid here are plaid shorts. That would be suggestive. And that would be, the defense lawyers would roll you over with a steamroller. And I would join them, because it's
Yeah.
that's the thing to be avoided. So one needs to be delicate in the hypothetical we just made up, if we're gonna charge him with 11 other kids behind the store. But, that would be something that you need to brainstorm a little bit before you walk in there. Think about how you're gonna approach that, because it's a delicate area. You're not gonna stumble upon that as a forensic interviewer. You're gonna have a little foresight before you go in there. And I would ask about, first of all, we need to establish that she's with Uncle Bob, or whatever his name was, at times other than this. The other times that you've seen Uncle Bob, tell me what he would wear. Does Uncle Bob wear anything different when he goes to bed from the blue jeans you told me about? Does Uncle Bob wear things different from blue jeans, or some other kind of pants? Does Uncle Bob ever wear underwear in the house? What does the underwear look like? Do you see Uncle Bob with shorts on? And that's as far as I would go. Tell me what they look like. And the other thing to do is get a search warrant. We'll go find his underpants. Just search his house and empty his drawers and find those plaid underpants.
So definitely wouldn't reach for naked, wouldn't even say that at all, wouldn't even say,
Naked?
well, I know that language is probably something that's.
No. The word you said was naked? Okay.
Yes.
You're saying you definitely wouldn't use the word naked?
Right.
Okay, probably not. I mean, there may be context where you might use the word naked, but you don't want to offer the word naked. In other words, did you ever see Uncle Bob naked?
Yes.
Yeah, well, you might say, did you ever see Uncle Bob with no clothes on?
or no-
I mean, naked, if they know what naked means, the word naked isn't the problem, isn't a potential problem that you're asking about. It's offering that he was unclothed to the child because that has a sexual connotation, so that kind of leading statement might be problematic, is what you're, to interpret what you're asking me.
Fine, yeah.
So if it's naked or with no clothes on, the question is offering the fact that Uncle Bob may have been nude at one time might be problematic. And again, I say it all depends upon context, whether you're gonna ask that. If other people were naked, or she went in the bathroom and he came out of the shower. But the way to talk about naked is to ask what they were wearing, you know? And if they weren't wearing anything, you'll get naked. So one ought to avoid the naked and no clothes on, unless it's contextually makes sense. You know, if she told you about 4 times he was totally nude, and you're talking about the 5th time, you could say, was he naked that time? You know, and that would be an okay, because it's already, that cat's out of the bag. Go ahead.
Not to use these words with kids under 7. Now, would you suggest not to use these words with kids over 7 as well?
What words?
Like any average?
Oh, these words? You know,
Only-
you make a good point here. A lot of these recommendations are for smaller children, but many of them are not. So I would suggest that you teach yourself to ask questions in this way of all people and all kids. You know, prepositions are a problem no matter who, right? They're ambiguous whether the person on the other side of the interview room is a boy, a girl, or a man, or a woman, or a grandpa or grandma. You know, global memory search is a human issue. It's more pronounced in kids. Not so much a big deal with adults, but it's still a very human kind of thing. See, we understand that every doesn't mean all time since the day you were born, and you don't need to do that kind of search. We adults kind of get a sense of, you know, we know rather intuitively and rather quickly. We just want to know the times that we were around Uncle Frank. You know, we don't need to do an investigation or look for collateral sources, and, you know, we kind of understand what the interviewer means. But some kids, when they hear ever, you know, may want to rule out everything, and they don't quite know how to do that. Again, these are very small, focused linguistic issues when you get into negative polarity and global memory search and all that, but, you know, every little bit helps, you know? I mean, every little bit helps. If, you know, 2 out of every 100 kids have a global meltdown, memory meltdown, then that's 2% of your interviews. You know, and take that across state, the whole state. If there's 100,000 interviews, that's 200 kids that got confused because we couldn't say some instead of any. Yeah, we looked at some of these, and I'm going to go look at Professor Walker's article in a moment, so I'm not going to go over these again. Multisyllabic words, not really keeping it simple, right? When we use unintentionally and please demonstrate. And I see interviewers say that from time to time. Now, I want you to demonstrate with the dolls. Show me.
Yeah.
Deliberately. What would be a very child-friendly way to say deliberately? 2 words. On purpose. Very good. Tag questions are poison, right? I mentioned those in the last class. They are simply statements with the request that you agree with me at the end. Pronouns, we dealt with. Time, we dealt with. Sudden topic shifts, I mentioned last class as well. I expressed to you that when you're talking about a particular touching or a particular interaction or a particular topic in the child's abuse scenario or her explanation of what happened or his, you want to stick to that one specific topic. If you're talking about the time it happened in the truck, let's stay in the truck. If you need to ask a question about the bedroom, then you need to say that. You need to use your chapter headings, you need to label these things. So for example, if in the bedroom the child describes multiple acts of abuse over a period of time, and she says, and then he would take the rubbery thing out and he would flush it down the toilet. And then you're talking about the time in the truck, and you want to refer back to something that happened in the bedroom, you need to say, you know, Gabriella, you told me he had that rubbery thing on his wiener, and when you were telling me how he would do this in your bed on the princess comforter, you said that he had that rubbery thing too. Well, he had a rubbery thing. Is the rubbery thing in the car like the rubbery thing in the bedroom? Now that might be suggestive, but I'm just trying to show you how you mention the bedroom. And
To help them.
if you're going to go back to the bedroom, rather than say, well, you told me before about a rubbery thing, is this the same kind of rubbery thing? Or how did this rubbery thing look? Or what did he do with the rubbery thing? You need to say something like, when you told me about him touching you on the princess comforter in your bedroom, you said he threw the rubbery thing in the toilet bowl and flushed it. Tell me what happened to the rubbery thing when he took it off in the car. Now, I don't know that you would even want to say something like that, but my point is you need to say, when you were telling me about the bedroom, when you were telling me about what happened in the shed, when you were telling me about what happened in the schoolyard, you need to put labels and chapter headings on these things. And more importantly, you don't even need to go back to the bedroom unless you have to. Now you've told me everything about what happened in the bedroom. Is there something that I didn't ask you about what he did in the bedroom? I don't think so. Okay, if you remember something later, say, Joe, I remember something else about what happened in the bedroom, and I'll listen. Gabriella, we're done talking about what happened in the bedroom. I want to talk about what happened in the truck. Where were you sitting in the truck when it first started, when Grandpa put his hand down your pants? Again, assuming there's a prior statement about that. So you need to avoid sudden topic shifts and sudden time shifts, and you want to label, keep your chapter headings in order and clear to the child what you're talking about. Don't jump around. Why questions? Why questions? Now, we didn't talk about this last week. We kind of left off right about here. Why questions are poison as well. There are a few problems with why questions. The first problem is it asks for someone's motivation. Why did he flush the condom down the toilet bowl? The most that any human, whether they be a brilliant Harvard-educated nuclear scientist or a little 6-year-old girl who's struggling in school, the most they can do is guess or speculate about Grandpa or Uncle Mike or Big Jerry's motives. It calls for speculation. Now, with older people, you can ask those kinds of questions because if you have enough life's experience, you can draw inferences from events and behaviors.
Is there a need to even ask that question?
Maybe, maybe not. You make another good point. You make another good point, and I'm just offering that as an example. It may be totally unnecessary to ask that question.
Because I'm thinking that, I'm sure the jury can read right to that. If you're thinking that rubbery thing and then flush the rubbery thing.
Yeah, they can, I mean, it's, the inference about his motives is pretty obvious, right? He wants to get rid of it, it's evidence, it's a used condom, has semen in it, what are you gonna do with it? Flush it down the toilet, get rid of it. But, so to that extent, it was a poor example, but we may say, Grandpa went into the kitchen, he was touching me on my boobies and telling me, ooh, how does that feel? And then he stopped and he went in the kitchen and then he came back in the room and he started to touch me on my coochie. Why did Grandpa go in the kitchen, right? That seems to be a question that might be on many interviewers' minds. That might be a relevant inquiry. And, you know, for an adult, you might be able to ask them why, and they might be able to give you a response based upon their inferences, based upon, you know, their reasoned conclusions about what happened at that time. But to ask kids to speculate about another's motives is bad practice. You know, kids have a hard enough time with their own motives. You know, why'd you break the lamp? Why'd you put oatmeal in the VCR? Why did you stick your hand under the hot water? Why did you put the dog poo, you know, on the kitchen table? I don't know. It was funny. That's my son's thing, you know, when he does something kook. I don't say why, but it doesn't get any better an answer. But at least he doesn't feel a little bit less accused. So his thing is now it's funny. Well, it's not funny to me, but it is to me. You know, that's okay. So these parental dialogues are getting more and more fun. The big problem with why is, and I hinted at it a moment ago, is that it's what? When the query is about the child's motives.
Accusatory?
Yeah, it can be, in many cases, accusatory, especially when we use it in interviews. Well, why didn't you tell? And you can soften it up and throw rose petals all around it and fluff it up like the softest, fluffiest pillow and lay it there gently in front of them and say, why didn't you tell somebody if this was going on every day after school? You know what they hear? Why didn't you tell somebody? Why? That's what they hear. It's accusatory. It's consistent with their expectations. It blames them. It puts blame on them. And this is the last thing we want to do now. The last thing. You know, I recommend that we scrap why questions about victims' motives, no matter how old they are. Because it's accusatory. Let me say that differently. It feels accusatory to the victim nearly all the time, no matter who's asking a question and the manner in which they ask the question. It feels accusatory. We may not mean it to be accusatory. It may be a very legitimate area of inquiry. We may need to know why or their motive the best they can report it to us. We may need to know that because the jury might want to know, or the supervisor might want to know, or the judge might want to know, because it is logical to ask that kind of question. So we need to switch it up a little bit and find a different way to ask why. And I'll give you some whys, and we'll try to figure out a way to ask them. Why didn't you tell somebody right away? He told you to take off your clothes? Why did you take off your clothes? This happened at school? Why didn't you tell a teacher? Why did you, child says, he molested me in the closet. When? After chess practice. Okay. Did he molest you a second time? Yeah, he molested me when I asked for extra help about chess the next week. Okay, were there other times? Well, a few days later, I went in for extra help again, and he molested me again. All right. And when was, you said there was one more time? When was the last time he molested you? Well, the last time was just about a week ago when it was after school and I was waiting for the bus and I went back and I needed some extra help with some moves I was practicing. And what happened? And he took my clothes off. Did he help you practice chess? No. What about the other 3 times you went for extra help with the chess teacher? Did he give you any extra help? No, he just molested me all those times. And you want to go, well, why'd you go back? What were you thinking? Well, I was thinking he might not do it again. And I was thinking I wanted some extra help. And I was thinking I really liked chess. And I thought he wouldn't do it anymore. And I was thinking if I didn't go, he would get mad at me. And I was thinking if I didn't go, he might tell my mom and I might get in trouble. And I was thinking if I didn't go, he might kill me or hit me. Or my brother would get in trouble, or he'd molest my sister, and you can go on and on and on. Now, although you want to do like I suggested him, that's the initial, among some people, the way to do it. We know more than that. I've been doing this a long time, you're doing this a long time. We know that there are a variety of reasons why a child, or even an adult victim of sexual abuse, although we demand more of our adults, and they make some of the most peculiar decisions, but there may be a million different reasons why that child went back again and again that defy adult logic, that are the most logical things in the world to them, the most compelling explanations you can ever imagine from their perspective, and maybe from ours if we listen to them and we put ourselves in their shoes for just a moment. But it's nice to know what their motives were, especially if the setup is such as I described, that it seems so illogical from a grown-up perspective. They keep going back and back and back, and it's got to be asked. It's got to be asked. You want to be a good interviewer, you got to ask it. So how can you ask it differently without saying why? What does Professor Walker suggest? Or what might you do if you've ever thought about this?
What made you go back?
Yes, very good. That's one way to do it. What made you go back? You told me that he didn't show you anything about chess the first 2 times. What made you go back the 3rd time? What was going on in your mind? What were you thinking? What's another way to ask that? Why did you go back? Is there a...
Is there a reason?
Who? Jalissa, you said it?
Yeah.
Are you finding words, Grad? No, okay. Tell me what you said then.
There be some way.
Is there a reason? Very good, Jalissa. Is there a reason you went back? I prefer, is there a reason to what made you? But I like them both, Is there a reason that you went back in the room? Is there a reason you didn't tell somebody what happened? Is there a reason you wore your nightgown? Is there a reason? What made you go back? Those kinds of questions avoid some of the problematic aspects of why questions. I don't want to overdo why, but it happens all the time, It's what investigators do. They're trying to size up the credibility of people. They're trying to size up their motives. So it's legitimate to question what the person's motives were. That's how we, that's one of the ways that we get into the difficult task of determining truthfulness or reliability or credibility. We did any or some. We're not going to go back there. These are just basic tips. Use simple, common, everyday words. Use names and places rather than pronouns. You'll see when I introduce you to the Corner House Finding Words protocol, you'll see that we use something called family circles. And in those family circles, we name people. And we'll get into that in great detail later. We name people that they live with, and we draw a little circle. And you'll see later, we ask the child, who do you live with? And we draw a little circle. Mommy, what do you call her? Everybody they introduce, we go, what do you call her? I want to know the child's word. And they may say, Mommy. Mommy, what do you mean? What do I call her? Okay, Mommy. Mom's boyfriend. He lives in the house with you? Uh-huh. Now, you can say, what's his name? Steve. What do you call him? Right? Steve. But not always, right? There's a lot of variations on what kids call moms, boyfriends, paramours, stepfathers, and the like, even moms. And then you get to grandmas, grandpas, that's always fun. Because you have a lot of these ethnic terms that are cute and fun and nostalgic to me sometimes. Who else lives there? Grandma. What do you call her? Grandpa, what do you call her? Auntie Maria. Auntie Maria, what do you call her? Auntie Maria, okay. Who else? Her kids. What's the kids' names? What do you call them? Well, they're my cousins. Okay, what do you call them? What do you call them? So you'll have this board, and it'll have a bunch of circles, and you'll have, by saying what do you call them, you'll have the proper names. And the great thing about this protocol is it's like one big enduring cheat sheet for the interviewer. So when Nicky Boy and Big Mike came over, was Nona upstairs? Now, if you didn't have this thing, and that's not why we do it, but if you didn't have this easel with all this information on it, you would not ask that question so effortlessly. Remembering the child's name is often a challenge. And that's one thing you don't want to mess up, man.
Is that the same thing with body parts? Right, is that something else?
Yeah.
You know that,
What do you call it?
right, and.
What's
and
your word?
Is it better for the interviewer to not point to their own body parts? And to have diagrams, like for me as an investigator going out in the field, having an anatomy, female, well, like a girl anatomy, a boy anatomy, depending on the interview of the interviewee, and pointing to when you call this and when you call this the same way as naming the people in the household.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Ideally, you would use diagrams.
As opposed to yourself, which might in
Yes.
some way kind of get you caught up.
Well, look, I appreciate that Child Protective Service workers in the field, I don't see why you couldn't do some of these things, but it's not tradition to bring diagrams and create evidence, I guess. There may be arguably persuasive reasons not to do these things. And you may be forced to point to your own head or, I just don't feel comfortable pointing to my private parts, no matter where I am in an interview. But yeah, we do not recommend that you use your own body as a prop wherever you are. But I don't criticize Child Protective Service workers for doing that. I can appreciate why sometimes you got to do that.
I
Sometimes.
mean, I had a parent who refused to let the prosecutors speak to the child before DYFS, because, I mean, I don't know if each office is different, but I know at the office I work at, if we know it's a sex abuse case, we immediately call the prosecutors to find out, is it okay to interview the child, or should we allow them to do the forensic interview? And I actually had a parent who told me, I don't want a prosecutor to speak to my child, but I will allow you in the home to interview my child and speak to them. So basically doing what the forensic interviewer would have done.
Yeah, look, that's a rarity, at least in my experience, and I've been doing this for a while. That's a rarity. There are a number of different things that could happen that make it hard to use the protocol that we recommend, and any protocol for that matter. But it's very rare in my experience. 99% of the time, they're going to do the interview, they're going to use the Child Advocacy Center, and they're going to use our protocol. But you get parents like that now and then, and it depends upon the facts, how far we can encourage them to have the forensic interview done by the prosecutor staff. And, that also may be related to communication, because, the word prosecutor, and if you learned anything from the child interviews, the word prosecutor, it just has a negative feel to it. It sounds aggressive, it's got a hard C in it, it sounds like prostitute and persecute, and we know from auditory discrimination errors that the words that are similar can corrupt the word that is the one we're using, in some way. They can have a bad feeling about it. So my point is that they may, the perception of prosecutor may be, and there's some validity to it, prosecutors do prosecute, they haul people into court, they put people in jail. You know, that it's not only is there, it's a strong and aggressive word, but it stands for an institution whose job it is, you know, to punish people and to present facts that result in punishment. So all those things make the parent think that this is going to be a terrible experience for the child, that some aggressive person is going to bully my child and not be soft and gentle. The good news is the perception of child protection is one of, not by universally, but that's somebody who's going to be empathetic and understanding and softer in approach and all that. So I can guess that may have motivated that caregiver. But if if that caregiver learned that, there are child interview specialists, that it's done at a center, that these are experienced people, that they interview, dozens of children a week and hundreds a month, that they may have felt more comfortable. I don't know. But ultimately, we want to act in the child's best interest. And if we need that caregiver to feel comfortable and that child to feel comfortable because their caregiver feels comfortable, then in certain cases, that may be the best way to start. But I would do everything as the supervisor of my unit to discourage that caregiver from starting out that way. And I would try to express why and the potential for. Now, the only assumption I can make in your anecdote is that neither parent was a suspect, nor were anyone related to the caregiver suspects.
The mom said she spoke to her child, and her child told her that nothing happened.
Yeah,
It was like a spin-off, the children mentioned another child being present when a sexual act occurred. The child wasn't touched, but the child was a witness to the touch, inappropriate behavior. It was actually sexual. He actually had sex with the child. So my child was a witness.
Well, what I'm suggesting is, and there are very few scenarios where this isn't the case, the caregiver saying, the prosecutors aren't going to interview my child, okay? Is there a reason that you don't want the prosecutors to, Why? No, is there a reason? So you want to figure out what's that, and you may be able to address that, diplomacy negotiation is far more potent than being a bully or coercion. So you want to try to deal with that. But if that caregiver has some relationship, either directly, if the accused is her brother or her father or her cousin or her best friend's kid, well, that tail's not going to wag the dog, at least in my county, you're going to, you can't have civilians determining how an investigation is going to go. Now, look, they may go, you're not doing it, go get a court order, and then sometimes you may have to get a court order, and then you may have to negotiate. In the end, as I suggested a moment ago, if it's in that kid's best interest, and it's in the best interest of getting the information now rather than going through the courts, then we may have to go that route. But it's rare. We get parents like that, and some of them are persuasive. Some of them, especially if the kid's just a witness. We don't have a lot of leverage then. But our most potent leverage is to give them a grand jury subpoena and compel them to come back with their child and themselves and take a day off of work and spend all day with us. And, even the most, some parents say, okay, and they take the subpoena, and that's fine. But many parents simply say, okay, well, what can we do, and you reach compromise. Anyway, so we were talking about the family circles, and I was making the point that their names are on there. That's a real nice aspect of this interview protocol I'll introduce you to later. When questioning children, you want to use one idea at a time. You want to begin the question with the main idea. We talked a little about that. The active and passive voice. You want to check the child's definition. The child's definition. Sometimes kids will say, and then we went back to the grocery store and he started getting nasty with me. But ain't nobody get nasty with me. I told him I ain't down with that, so I went back out front. Hold on, Gabriella, I don't know what nasty means. What does nasty mean? You know, nasty started to get fresh. I don't know what fresh means, and I wasn't there to see what was happening. What do you mean by fresh? What did he do? You know? Check for definition, we call that. You know? And even if you think you know, you don't know, especially with kids. Because sometimes the perpetrator will confound the issue by misleading the child and making false statements or making ill-informed statements of his own. You know? So if the child says, you know, then he made me blow him. Okay, tell me what happened. How did he make you blow him? What does blow mean? I don't know, I wasn't there. Rape is a big one we get. Why do you tell me why you're here today? Because my guidance counselor raped me. Okay, lots of kids mean different things when they use a word like rape. What does that mean? What happened? Tell me what rape means. Tell me what rape means to you. Okay. You know, you get a teenage girl in there or something, she says, well, then I went down on him. Okay, well, what does that mean? Lots of kids use different words and they mean different things. Now, you may think you know what it means. You may be right about what it means. It may mean that in 96% of cases, but maybe 4% it doesn't. I don't know what it means to that kid. So we say, you know, I don't know what go down on you means. You know, a little old-fashioned. What does that mean? You don't even have to say things like that. You just say, I don't know what that means. What do you mean by going down on you? What did you do? What did he make you do? What happened next? Where was your body? Where was his body? Facts, facts. Descriptive words. We don't want conclusions. You know? This is very specific, though. Check child's definition. What does nasty mean? And you'll see if you forensic interview that these statements by kids will come up all the time where you need to check for definition. Any questions so far?
Well, it's a little ahead, I'm being a little ahead of what we're discussing, but are we going to have, for the midterm, is there going to be questions about how to question?
The midterm is going to be rather basic in the sense that it's not going to be experiential. You're not going to watch a video or anything like that. It's going to be a rather conventional midterm where I say to you, a major problem with, maybe a true or false, a major problem with global memory search, or a major problem with asking questions using the word ever or never or always is that it calls for global research, true or false. Now, it doesn't call for global research, does it? It calls for global memory search. And you may say that's a tricky question, but it's not. Research is what you do in a library, and it's not the right word. Maybe a short answer. Maybe saying, correct this sentence. Why did you go back to the chess teacher, Mary? Isn't there not always a problem in there when the chess teacher calls you in?
That's great.
So I'm going to ask you to take a sledgehammer to that sentence and reconstruct it. So I may make you do things like that. I may make you explain to me and give a couple of examples of an auditory discrimination error. And something like that. So there may be a short answer, and the short answer is going to be as short as I just said, and those other kinds, okay? Kids have a tough time giving an adult-style narrative. They may start from the middle, the end. They may jump around. That's just the way kids are, and we need to know that. Irony, sarcasm, metaphors, and figures of speech, poison. Avoid them. You know, like I told Daniel, who was slurping his cereal when he was 6 years old, slobbering and picking those Cheerios flying around the kitchen table, milk dripping from his face. I'm like, why don't you just put your face in the bowl? That, my son, is sarcasm. Huh? You told me to. Now, he knew. He didn't quite know what sarcasm was. But I think he knew at that age. But he was being a wise guy. He didn't quite put his whole head in there, but you know what he did. But those kinds of things, sarcasm, irony, metaphors, figures of speech, you got to be careful with, because they don't get it. And, the same sentence can mean 3 different things or more, simply by the way it's said. Why don't you go ahead and sit down? May mean keep standing up. What, are you tired or something? I may mean the opposite by trying to embarrass somebody. Why don't you go ahead and sit down if you're so tired? And the person might not sit down because I'm saying it in an aggressive way. I'm saying it in a sarcastic way, right? But they'll get the message. He doesn't want me to sit down. I may be to just jerk around by saying it that way, but my point is, if you're so tired, why don't you just sit down? Hey, if you're so tired, why don't you sit down? Take a seat. Take a seat. Take a seat, right? Questions, imperatives, declaratives. Kids don't get all that, They listen to the words. They're just beginning to understand words and appreciate words and the fact that they're symbolic for ideas and concrete concepts. So stay away from this stuff. I think we know that, right? Never, never, never ask the child to guess or pretend. That's exactly what we're trying to discourage in forensic interviewing. Well, if he did pull down your pants, what would it feel like? If he did, what is that? That asks you to imagine something. Well, how many times do you think it happened? No, never ask them to guess. In fact, we will teach you, forget about how many times. Did it happen once or more than once? Never ask the child to imagine, to get a picture in their head, or think real hard about it. The reason why I'm going past all these, they're redundant. Framing, I talked about. Those are bookheads. Pausing, I didn't talk about. Go ahead.
Question. As part of, when you guys are gonna start interviewing kids, because we were reading, do you start off like, if you don't know the answer to a question, say I don't know, like as a way of like kind of prepping them?
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. Those are what we call the ground rules. Yeah, and we don't recommend many, if any, ground rules, and I'll explain why later. But yeah, there are other protocols that emphasize the ground rules, and while the ground rules, are not fatal to a good interview, they don't undermine the interview directly. We believe there are better ways to make those points and more efficient ways. When I discuss this further, I'll explain it better, but those ground rules take up more time than they're worth because they tend to go in one ear and out the other. And if they're not effective, we're losing vital minutes at the beginning of an interview, and you only have so many minutes, and then they go away to kids. So you'll see why we don't recommend them, and if you do, there may be some very basic 1 or 2 that you say right away. The I don't know one is, there's people on both sides of that one, the one you offered, because that's an avoidance technique for many kids. I don't know, when they in fact do know. So we're giving them we're offering it to them on a silver platter to avoid And this isn't exactly the kind of investigative interview where the person who is being interviewed has a million reasons to withhold what really happened. And one effective way to do it is to feign amnesia, to make believe they don't remember. So, but we'll talk more about that. That's a little less of a language issue and more of a protocol issue, but that's a good one. We'll address that again. Pausing is very useful. In fact, I would get rid of the word useful. I think it's critical because pausing's related to listening. And as adults, we live in a fast-paced world where we need to get things done and we need to fire memos off, we need to write reports, we need to catch buses and trains, and we need things to happen now. But these children that we're interviewing have to listen, think, process, right, and then recite, and then express themselves. And it takes a while. You know, I watch my son Daniel when I give him a hard question, I ask him a question. You know, I could see him thinking, and that's not literal, but I could feel it. He's processing that information. These kids process this information, especially the smaller kids. So pausing is important. I am always impressed by great interviewers who pause a lot. Not only for emphasis, but because it allows the child to listen, process, and then tell us what happened. And, you know, when I watch the Corner House interviewers, for example, from up in Minnesota, you know, they just have so much patience. They'll ask a question and then the kid will start saying it.
There's slower pace in New Jersey.
Well, yeah, they may have an advantage there in the Midwest. We need the answer. We got to go. Yeah, they do a nice job. And Fran, Giselle, Rachel, and all the forensic interviewers I've known in my community, you know, they pick it up. They pick it up. Pausing is a valuable tool. It allows everybody to think, to recall, and then to express themselves. But especially the kids. They need a few seconds more than everybody else to kind of think about that. So that is an important tool. Just because a kid is able to recite a list doesn't mean they're competent. Narrative techniques are cultural. I think your reading by Professor Walker talked about cultural issues in interviewing. Different cultures approach storytelling differently. We'll talk more about that when we talk about cultural issues. Now, I want to look at Professor Walker's article now, but what we're going to do is take 5 minutes or so. I'm starting to get a dry throat. I want to go get a bottle of water, and we'll resume in about 5 minutes, okay? So we're back from break, and I'd like to just review some of the things that are in Professor Walker's chapters 3 and 4, which was part of this learning module. You'll see some of the things up on the board here in class, and I'm going to scroll through them. She identifies a number of problem areas, and she certainly identifies my pet peeve right here. Potential troublemakers, she calls prepositions, and they can be problematic, but more importantly, pronouns are even bigger troublemakers. She calls them, you'll see right here, indexicals. And I mentioned that earlier today and last week. Excuse me. And she says, think of them as you would a finger, an index finger pointing at something. They're indexicals because pronouns point to something else or someone else. These are pointing words, and as I've said over and over again, they have no meaning unless you connect them up with something else. I'm not going to go back there again. You'll see that I annotated and underlined certain things in this chapter, so that probably would be a good thing to focus on if you're studying for the midterm. Words like ahead of and behind are problematic for kids under 7. So we need to be careful with that as well. Some specific words, and we looked at it, always and never. Let's see how Professor Walker talks about always and never. Whether the children you question are of a particular stage, a youthful stage, absolutes such as always and never, as well as the words any and ever, require making a careful search through all past experience in order to answer accurately. Adults can have difficulty with that cognitive operation. It is unreasonable to expect children to succeed where grown-ups fail. So there you go again. Here's the word any. Let's see how she characterizes it. Any, or its compounds, anything, anyone, or anywhere, generally requires making a global search through all the possibilities, something even adults fail to do if their memories are not jogged. The word any has a negative push, she calls it, and it may account for the findings in her research on naturally occurring speech. Those findings suggest that include the words any, as well as anyone, anything, or anywhere, that those words are more likely to trigger a negative response, which is inaccurate, than are questions which use the word some. Some clinicians have also noted informally that anyone and someone can be perceived by some young children as if it was a specific person's name. So that's a little bit different. But she does talk about that negative polarity, or that push. Forgetting. For adults, forget generally means one of two things: a lapse in memory, as if I've forgotten her name, that's a lapse in memory, or a failure to carry out an intention. I forgot to buy the milk. It can be used conversationally in other ways that have nothing to do with prior knowledge or intention. But when a child answers with I forget, we aren't thinking in terms of conversation. We may be thinking uncooperative or obstinate or failure. The child is saying that they failed to recall something they once knew. That's highly probable. Now, let me tell you something else about I forget. I forget can mean a number of things, as Professor Walker just points out. It could mean, how much does a bottle of Coca-Cola cost? I forget. I just don't remember. It's not in there. So that's one thing. Failure to carry out an intention, right? I forgot to pay for the parking pass when I parked today. I knew about the parking pass. It's in my brain. I didn't forget it for all time. I just didn't do something that I wanted to do. I forgot to pay for the parking pass. So that's something else. I don't know is a cousin of I forget. Both I don't know and I forget could mean I do know, but I don't feel like talking about it with you. So I forget could mean, oh, I remember what happened, but you look mean, or I don't like your tie, or I don't want to get my daddy in trouble, or I'm going to get in trouble, or I don't understand this question. I don't know what word you're using. I'm confused. I'm scared. I'm embarrassed. All of those things can be hidden. A child can feel all of those emotions and hide behind, I don't know or I forget. So I don't know and I forget can be shields for the child that block us from peering into their emotional state or their true motivations, which have nothing to do with the words. I don't know or I don't remember. I don't know means I don't know the answer to that. I wish I did, but I don't know. I don't remember. I may have known at one time, but I forgot. Or I wanted to do it, but I forgot to do it. I didn't carry out an intention. I mean, those are things that are typically indicated by I don't know and I forget. But in the world of child maltreatment, kids sometimes use these statements to avoid answering questions and providing information that they truly do remember for a variety of emotional and familial and social reasons. We talked about touch. We talked about yesterday, today, and tomorrow last week. Legal words and jargon we've talked about. Bad. Ambiguity. We talked about the passive and active voice last week. Here's the active and passive voice by Ann Walker, a linguist. The sentence which English speakers are most accustomed to hearing sounds something like this. The dog ate my homework. That is, the favored form of sentence in the English language is right branching, left to right. It begins with the subject, the dog, moves right towards the verb, ate, and moves right again toward the object, my homework. That is the form that children first acquire, and the form that is easiest to process. Sentences which put something in front of the subject, although I probably could have come up with a better excuse, the fact is the dog ate my homework, are classified as left branching. Left branching creates complexity because it often involves embedding and puts strain on short-term memory. While most of the things said in everyday life begin with subject, verb, in the courts and in the legal system, many utterances do not. Now, we don't need to understand all this left branching, right branching, active and passive voice. We just need to know that the doer, that's the way I express it, the doer, the agent, the person doing something, the dog is at the beginning of the sentence. And that the verb follows and the object follows the verb. That's the way kids learn language early in life. And that's the way we ought to ask our questions. Simple as that. Forget about left branch, right branch, active, all that stuff. Negation we talked about. Passives. Compound questions. restricted choice questions. In all protocols, including the Finding Words Corner House protocol, restricted choice questions are discouraged. In fact, they're poor. They're poor forms of questions. And a multiple choice question can be a restricted choice question in many forms. But there's an easy remedy that you'll learn very quickly in this class, and that is simply to say, or something else. Was the car running or was it turned off? That's a restricted choice question. Why? Because there's only two options. The options that the interviewer or the questioner offered. That's it. Was the car running or was it turned off? Those are the only two options. Now, we know as grown-ups that we can say, it was not moving, it was idling. So I guess it was on, but it was idling. We can go beyond the forced choice, but little kids, and even bigger kids, children feel sometimes compelled to pick a response among the two. Or they're going to, rather than challenge us and say, well, by running, do you mean moving? It wasn't moving, it was in one place, but it was, the engine was on. You know, they're not going to get into that kind of give back or that kind of dialogue. They're going to pick the response that approximates what was really happening. So it wasn't turned off, but it wasn't running or moving. It was idling, so they'll pick running. Forced choice questions are dangerous for children because they will pick one of the responses, even if none of them are the correct response or reflect what really happened. And we've talked about this a little bit when we looked at some of the video clips. Where were his clothes? That's a good question. You want to, I don't know where his clothes were. Were his clothes on or off or something else? That's not a forced choice question. That is an open-ended question. Because the or something else makes it open-ended. It gives the child permission to offer some other response beyond the ones that were given to us by the all-powerful, all-knowing grown-up. Were his clothes on or off or something else? Especially since sometimes, many times, they're not simply on or off. They can be in a variety of different states of dress. People can be in different states of dress. What's the right answer if the pants are down to the knees? Are they on or off? If the perpetrator pulled his pants down to his knees, but had his shoes on, his pants still on, his belt, everything was on, his underwear were all scrunched down to his knees. Were his clothes on or off? They were neither. They were on or there was something else. And that needs to be expressed. Well, his pants were pulled down to his knees. That's the answer. Our choices were wrong. They weren't on and they weren't off. Those are restricted choice questions. Over there. Up top, number 7. Those are restricted choice questions. Every multiple choice question in the English language can be followed by an or something else. So you need to teach yourself to say or something else every time you use a multiple choice question. Even if you want to talk about that back room in the bodega, if you want to say, and it's not entirely appropriate, but say, well, tell me what was it like in the back room. Supposing a child can't give a description of the back room. Well, what was it like back there? Were there shelves? Was there food? Was there things that they sell out front stacked up? Or something else? Or something else? That makes it open-ended. Doesn't make it ideal, but it's better than forced choice or a restrictive question. I remember crowing about this new protocol I learned, and I went back to my boss at the prosecutor's office in the early millennium, 2001, 2000. Well, 99 was when I was trained. I came back 2000, whatever. I'm saying, Prosecutor Mashula, he was the first assistant. This thing's great. We're going to use it, and I want to do this, that, and the other thing. And I was explaining to him some of the concepts I learned. You know, the kinds of questions we asked are messed up sometimes. We ask these forced choice questions. You know, where his clothes on or off. Sometimes their clothes are kind of on and kind of off, right? They're partially on. So you just need to say or something else. And he's going, oh, yeah, I get that, you know. Yeah. Was it a boy or a girl or something else? You could just say or something else. And he looked at me and said, huh? And I said, well, maybe that one isn't perfect, but, you know, nowadays you got, who knows, transgender, hermaphrodites, whatever. It's possible. I would just put or something else at the end of every question that's a multiple choice, and you're okay. Then you will not be asking a restricted choice question. Number 8, asking DUR, do you remember questions? No good. I hate them too. Every question that you can possibly ask a person, much less a child, that begins with, do you remember, or do you recall, or can you tell me? You can ask exactly the same way. You can ask better if you jettison, you lop off, you get rid of that DUR. Everything. Do you remember what he was wearing? What was he wearing? Can you tell me if it was light or dark out or something else? Was it light or dark out or something else? Do you recall if he had something in his hand? Did he have something in his hand? Do you remember what his clothes looked like? What did his clothes look like? I think that after watching hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of interviews and watching interviews of people of all different abilities and all different geographic regions, I see a lot of do you remembers. And I think that in part that people ask questions that way because they believe that it is, or they feel that it is empowering to the child perhaps, or more respectful of the child, or a more gentler way. It's kind of like, only if you remember. It's okay if you don't. You know, do you remember if he was wearing the hat? Can you tell me what happened next? It's kind of deferential way to ask a question, right? That's kind of the way I feel about these questions. And a lot of people do them, and I even find myself doing it sometimes, and I wonder why. It comes out very naturally. And I've seen everybody do it all over the country. Can you tell me? Do you remember? Can you recall? Why are we asking that? Just ask the question. It's implied if they don't remember, they can't give you the answer. So why don't we like it? Well, let's see what Professor Walker says. But for one, it gives the kid an out. We have children who don't want to tell us what happened for a variety of reasons. They love the perpetrator. They're afraid of what might happen. They're embarrassed. They're ashamed. We've gone over this. We'll go over it in more detail when we look at the dynamics of child sexual abuse and how kids process that abuse. We know that they don't want to tell us what happened. So we give them an out built in the question at the beginning. No, I don't. No, I can't. Can't tell you. Let's see what Professor Walker says as well. One kind of complex yes-no question that is particularly problematic in child interviews typically begins with the phrase like, do you recall or remember? DURs, followed by at least one more proposition. Do you recall the last time you saw the knife? Interviewers of children should be concerned about these questions because of the way they are processed and the answers that they generate. When adults hear a question of this sort, they recognize from the opening phrase they are expected to answer yes or no. And that answer will be taken to mean that they affirm or deny, however many propositions follow the word remember. Responding appropriately to such a question entails being able to follow, process, and remember all of its parts. It also requires, especially if the question is a hostile one, being able to judge the intent of the questioner and make whatever modifications to the question that are necessary to answer truthfully. I remember A and B of the question, but I'm not sure about C, and I know that D never happened. Children, even older school-age children, are not good at doing any of this. A particular problem with questions of this type is that the adults seem to think that children are good at it, for they ask a lot of them, and they act as if the yes or no responses which they get are reliable indicators of a child's knowledge or belief. That can be a serious mistake because while children may process these questions the same way adults do, they often do not, turning the answer into a response that has no validity. Consider, for example, the following exchange between an adult and a 5-year-old girl. Do you remember telling TJ that Harv pulled Doug's shirt up and dug at his eyes with a spoon? No. A logical adult interpretation of that response would be that no meant that the child had no recollection of saying such a thing. And that is a possibility, but I don't think likely. It could also have a number of alternative interpretations from the child's point of view. That Harv did not pull up Doug's shirt, that Harv did not dig at Doug's eyes with a spoon, that it was not Harv but someone else who did one or both of those things, that the child did not tell TJ but told someone else. In fact, as further questioning revealed, her response meant none of these things. It simply meant, I don't even remember what you meant. I don't even remember the question. I don't even remember what you said. And I don't think Professor Walker, with all due deference to her as a professor of linguists at Georgetown, expressed that well enough. I think it simply means, I'm confused. That's what she means by, I don't remember what you said. I'm confused. I'm confused. I have to go back and look at that cookie sentence, right? Do you remember telling TJ? So there's point one. Does she remember telling TJ? Or, see, these kids will lop off the DUR and answer the question, did she tell TJ? Remember, it starts out with, did you remember telling TJ? So if she says no, that could mean she doesn't remember any of this. That's what Walker says in the beginning. Or she could have ignored the do you remember and interpreted it this way. This lady wants to know if I told TJ that Harv pulled Doug's shirt up and dug at his eyes with a spoon. I didn't tell TJ any of that. Or I told Mikey that, but I didn't tell TJ. Whatever it is, that is a false statement about the telling to TJ. What's the answer? No. Or she could say, the little girl to herself, well, I did tell TJ that Mikey pulled Doug's shirt up, but I didn't say that Harv pulled Doug's shirt up. What's the answer that the child will give? No. You know, suppose she told TJ and she did mention that Harv pulled Doug's shirt up, but he didn't say that he dug at his eyes with a spoon, he dug at his eyes with a fork. Or he never dug at his eyes at all. What would the child's response be to that question? No. Now, this is an offensive question for a few reasons. One of them is that nasty DUR, that do you remember, that valueless prefix, preamble, that valueless set of words. Do you remember? Do you recall? It has no value. It only serves to corrupt the process, to mess up things, to add ambiguity, confusion. Get rid of it. Now, simply getting rid of it here doesn't solve the problem. We need to break this sentence down, and we need to ask multiple questions because this is a compound question. Any questions or observations about DURs? You want to avoid questions that begin with, I suggest to you that, I submit to you, I believe you told us, isn't it a fact that? Now, these are questions that attorneys ask all the time. As Professor Walker says right here, they are wholly inappropriate for children. Young children believe that adults know everything, that they're always right about things, and that adults are clear, cooperative, and honest. The problem with Professor Walker's observation here is that defense lawyers will ask leading questions on cross-examination every day, all day. That's what they do. They want you to be misled. Not that they want you to be misled, but they want to offer that proposition out there and see if you agree with it. And that could be problematic. It is problematic for young children because they're gonna more likely agree with it because a grown-up's asking a question and they want to please the grown-up, and the grown-up must know everything. So these are a courtroom is a difficult place for children and a difficult place to understand the past through the mouths or words of children, unless the questions are asked well. And, lawyers are the worst. Tag questions, topic shifts we talked about. Kinship, dimensions, age, time, the why question. We talked all about that. We talked about I don't know a moment ago. Let's see, I think it's time for a video clip. Now, this clip, if I recall it, this is just an example of a very competent kid. She's a little bit older, and you can see how familial relationships and kinship can get a little complicated. If I recall, the opposites happen here. The child is so high functioning that she does a great job clarifying for the interviewer just who is who. And I always like this kid in this video. It really doesn't make the point that I'm making, that kinship terms can be confusing for kids. And kinship terms can be dangerous because they can stand for a variety of different people and proper nouns because they're ambiguous. But it's kind of fun to look at, because it's the kid who's educating the interviewer. Okay, let's start this over. Oh, I gotta use this button up here. Volume up. Let's see. Hope it doesn't blow us out of the room here. Can you hit the light, Franklin, please? Thank you. The problem with pronouns and their close cousins' kinship terms, no pun intended, is that they are inherently ambiguous and often difficult to follow. Unless you connect them up with a proper noun or a proper name, they have no meaning. So they can be confusing for children and sometimes even for adults. Watch how this interviewer struggles somewhat.
Anita, she came back? Dooney came back.
Because Dooney's the husband of Ed.
Dooney is the husband?
Yeah, of the,
Of Denny?
yeah.
Okay.
The
So,
husband of Dooney is Danny.
okay.
And the mother of Danny is Amina.
Oh, okay, I gotcha. So Dooney came back.
Yes, and then she said,
That was a different kid than I thought, actually, but she was also correcting the interviewer. There was another one that was even older, an older kid. I don't have it on this clip here. Let's see if there was any other clips we did not look at. Kinship terms, comparatives, children and agency, video lecture, discussion board. Okay, you could clip that back on, Franklin. Thanks for your help. Anyway, that concludes children and language. As I started out last Tuesday, the primary way that we communicate with children is through words and language, right? The primary way that we learn about the past, we learn about what a child may have experienced, is through the words that they express about the past. We also learn that their behavior and their emotions are very powerful communicators as well. In fact, are more reliable than language alone. Nevertheless, it's language that is the primary way that we find out what the heck happened. So hopefully over the past 2 weeks, we've learned about some of the more difficult areas in forensic interviewing when it comes to children and language, and some strategies to get around those difficult areas. You know, how to keep it simple, how to use concrete words, how to get rid of prefixes like do you remember, how to speak to their egocentricity and say I wasn't there, how to ask open-ended questions and avoid forced choice questions. Excuse me. How to communicate more effectively with kids so that we can get the most information and the best information, the highest quantity of high-quality information, and using the right language and respecting the child's linguistic development and allowing that child to communicate at their own level gives us an advantage and makes it more likely we'll get a more accurate picture of what happened. And there are many other things that we'll learn throughout this semester that will build upon these language strategies to get the most information and the highest quality information. So this is just one aspect of the forensic interview. Any questions about what we learned? Go ahead.
There was a slide that you didn't touch on that I had a question about. It said something about a forensic interview is not a conversation, but the child doesn't know that. So what about that is important for us as interviewers? That, why does it matter that they think of it as a conversation and we don't?
You know, I don't know. I need to, that slide was prepared by Corner House. I'm not quite sure what they mean by that. I have to reflect upon it for a moment. A forensic interview is not a conversation. What was it? It is a conversation?
No, it said something like a forensic interview is not a conversation, but the child doesn't know that.
Oh, okay, so they may, it implies that the child may think it's a conversation.
Right.
I
didn't know if it was important to know that or.
Well, not for me, because I don't know what it means. But I think it's important for me to know what it means, so I probably should find out. Any other questions? All right, the exam's not next Tuesday, is it? No. Wait a minute, wait, let's check the, no, not the exam, but I want to check the course due dates, see what we have upcoming here. We're at memory and suggestibility. Oh, you just have a couple discussion boards, right? And it's a 2 weeks of memory and suggestibility. Okay, see you next week. Salud.